not done this before, you and I have agreed. Thank you, Chan.
Recording is on.
Well remembered.
Sorry. I didn't know it was too loud. It was this loud.
I'll start that bit again, right? So it's on the video.
It would be good if you start over. Yeah.
Okay. So, João, welcome to our first community working group AMA, or Ask Me Anything. This is something we're trying to bring more kind of debate and discussion and networking into the community working group. And you're our first guest. So welcome. You're definitely also the draw for all these people, because all these people aren't usually in the working group. So João and I have kind of agreed a rough structure. This is the first time we're doing it. So we're gonna run through a series of fairly obvious questions, I guess. And then we'll have plenty of time afterwards for people to ask their own questions or make their own comments or flag what they're doing that's relevant. So the first part will be listening for most of you, but the second part will definitely be participatory. So feel free, while João's talking, to put questions in the comments box. That's fine. You don't have to wait. And we can get to them when we get to the Q&A bit. Otherwise, you can raise your hand when we get to that bit. So João, maybe it'd be nice if you just introduce yourself, tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure, yes. Hello, everyone. Hi, Pete. Thanks a lot for having me here. And this first AMA, it's an honor to be here and a big pleasure. And thanks all for joining as well. So I'm João Porto de Albuquerque. I come originally from Brazil, and I've worked in Germany for a long time, and now I am in the UK. I was before at the University of Warwick and have just moved north to, as far as north as I never imagined to leave, coming from south into Scotland and to Glasgow. And I am a professor in urban analytics. That's my title. And I also co-directed, I'm deputy director of the Urban Big Data Center. So I come from a background in computer science, but have been doing research around digital geography and urban analytics for several years, and have been working with OpenStreetMap for a long time across kind of these different countries, moving from Brazil to Germany and to the UK, England and Scotland. And being one of the things perhaps to say about me is that I'm really someone who likes to do, I'm a researcher, but I also to do kind of research which is very engaged with practice and with practical kind of impact. And I think I've been working with OSM since a long time in different ways. A lot of this is about using the OSM data. This was the beginning, but then it became for me much more interesting to work with the OSM community and to build communities together with local actors, as well as analyzing the data together and mapping together. So a lot of my work today is really about finding ways to be so that we can work across research and practice, community, working a lot with the private communities. With I've worked with TASAUF here in Bangladesh, but also in Kenya. I've seen that there's some people from Kenya in Nairobi, in particular, mapping in Nigeria, Lagos and Ibadan. And had the pleasure to work also in Pakistan, in Karachi, doing mapping in slums. All of these countries mapping with informal communities, informal settlements, also called slums. And in particularly, I am at home in Brazil and doing a lot of mapping in São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Acre, also with marginalized communities, and more recently also in Colombia, in Medellin as well.
Okay, cool. So we're gonna talk specifically in this session about the slum informal settlement favela mapping. Do you want to? We're going to do a kind of bit of a deep dive on the Brazil project that you're currently collaborating on. Do you want to give a bit of an overview first to provide some context?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Yeah, so this area we've been working together, and Philip is here as well, working very closely with us in the working group. One particular area of research we are interested is really in combining OpenStreetMap mapping and community mapping, very grounded and really community a mapping that comes, from community or that is done by community members. And then really kind of like we are facilitators and enablers of this process happening, and also kind of like local universities, and combining this with using the data for specific purposes. And a key area of my research has been really disaster resilience, in general, and now it has been expanded a little bit about looking at resilience not only from a kind of like natural hazards, floods, landslides, droughts, but also to look at this about like resilience in a broader term, in terms of community resilience, of really using the data for empowering and for having kind of like community development. So I think this was a bit of my transition in this area of mapping, looking a lot of using OpenStreetMap tools, developing open source tools for kind of like enabling and empowering communities to map themselves and map their territories. And I think this is the broad area of research. As I said, I have had the pleasure of working with communities in a number of countries so far, and really very keen to continue this type of work, which is in collaboration with close kind of like local OSM communities and it really favela and slum dwellers, and sometimes also with the kind of like associations that they have, like the some of the federations of the Slum Dwellers International, but also local groups like the ones we will talk a little bit more about today, that I hope in the future they will also get engaged more in the community working group and share their own experiences with all of you.
Very nice. So we're gonna hear a bit of detail on the community mapping work. I'm going to try and pronounce it, but I'm going to fail. So I'm going to say Proventorio in Niteroi, but you can correct
perfect.
me.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay, good.
Yes. yes, indeed.
But before you start, Joe, I'm going to share a couple of links while you're speaking. So to the OpenStreetMap of that area, but also to the OSM wiki where the project is kind of described. So just so you know, I'll be doing that in the background.
Great, thanks for that, Pete. Yeah, indeed. I think we'll be talking about this project, which is called Ubilatam. It is a project funded here through a UK funder, research funder, and it's about kind of like mainly community resilience through citizen data generation. So I've been using citizen data generation in different ways in the past in research, also social media, tagging of images. I see that Melanie, for example, is interested in satellite imagery. I'm doing a lot of combining remote sensing and automated methods with map swipe and other types of kind of like classifications. But in this project, we are really interested in this in this type of looking at really asking questions about how the community engagement with mapping can be empowering. Because I think one thing perhaps, and that's the start of some of my provocations, is that mapping is great. We all here because of this. We love mapping, but sometimes mapping can be empowering and sometimes not. And I think that that's something perhaps we can recognize, that it is kind of like there is perhaps a distance between the mapping standards and the tools and the communities sometimes. And I think one of the things I'm really interested in research is how to bridge these distances so that really the communities can not only kind of like use for others their tools, but use for themselves, and then really take big ownership of this. And I think the example we wanted to talk about, which is in the city of Niterói in Rio de Janeiro, it's very close to Rio de Janeiro. There's a big bay called Baía de Guanabara, and it's across, it's in the other side. Niterói is the city, the other side of the big city of Rio de Janeiro. Peter's sharing the map now, and you will see it is an amazing map because, you know, if you click at it, you will realize that they kind of like have taken really ownership of the map and of really thinking about how the map can work for them. So I think I wanted to share with you a bit of this story, because I think for me it has been really very satisfying, but also very inspiring, the way I think OSM can be really empowering. And I think it was a process. In the beginning, I think there was a bit of skepticism from the community about mapping, about, what to do with mapping, or what kinds of maps, or why does it matter for us? We know the community, why should we map, and interestingly, we approached this using kind of like one big reference for us is the Brazilian educator Paulo Freire, and then he is is someone very known in the social sciences, because he wrote a book, called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and it was very inspiring. But because interestingly, he was someone doing literacy, really teaching people how to read and write, and what he realized was that actually, you shouldn't start with words that are alien from the community. You have actually to start all of education processes with things that belong to the community, and from there you can build together a collaboration of and a co-production of knowledge. And I think we are very inspired of this, and then really thinking about mapping as co-production of knowledge, mapping as a critical pedagogical process, a process that not only teaches, but also we learn. So everyone teaches and learns, and we really kind of like, work together in as kind of like researchers and community members, both as co-researchers, and then community members are researchers with us. So I think this is a bit of the background and the philosophy used, and that meant really that we would put the community and their needs in the first, in the foreground. And we started with this, but then we call this a dialogic process, not only because it involves dialogue, really, it involves a lot of dialogue, of exchanges, but because also it's a dialogue between perhaps sometimes different worlds and different worldviews and perspectives. And we have to acknowledge this in the beginning, that we depart from different points, but actually we can, through dialogue, synchronize and then get to a common understanding. And I think that is what the map is showing, that the Preventorio map is showing the results of this dialogue, which was kind of like really a conversation about what can map do for you? How do we kind of like, think of ways that can map that are at the same time meaningful to the community, but also could also be used as advocacy, instrument for the municipality, because then now you know your community, but now you can communicate through the map something to the municipality and ask for services that are not there. So I think this was a bit of the dialogic process we followed, and you can see there the level of detail in the communities is quite interesting. Interestingly, if you zoom out just a little bit in the map and then look at the neighboring regions, there is another one called Morro do Peixe Galo and Morro Salinas, which are quite close, and they, just so that you get a bit of a comparison, they also have this similar structure. But you see, we don't have data about them yet, because we started with Preventorio. But you can also have a look at, think that everything was like these other ones. Well, there was nothing before in this map, before we started this process. And there are things that you can see here in the map, then there are things that you can't. And the things that you can't are also very interesting, because, the community started to map, as you can see here, building footprints, which is, usual as we usually do, the footpaths, and they kind of like, small shops that there are, but there are a lot of other data that they are collecting now, which is kind of like also in OpenStreetMap, but is not rendered. And there is some data which is not in OpenStreetMap. So a lot of the process was also to discuss about, what to make it visible and what does it mean to make information visible about the community. So I think in general, like, just stopping then to come back to you, Pete. Now, sorry that it was a big introduction to this project, but then in general, it was really an interesting project, a process for me about really looking at this kind of like way of like using very purposefully a dialogue methodology, which is this co-production of knowledge in the central place, and mapping as an instrument for this, but also kind of like how mapping got more and more integrated in our knowledge building processes, and it's now really seen by the community as a main asset and a main kind of like avenue of transformation. They recently acquired the project together with another NGO, and they used the tools and the maps to do kind of like a project now about fishing, because as you see, is a kind of like, is an area near to the sea, and there are some, there is a small fishing community there, and they are now kind of like doing something specifically related to the fishing that they did on their own in the maps. And I think in that sense, it's kind of like, one of the very interesting that we have seen. Yeah, so I stop for a moment, and then
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's really interesting, and I know from chatting to you beforehand that this group in Preventorio has now kind of become a facilitator and enabler for other groups, right? So like you described your role and your team's role as that, but they are now fulfilling that role locally. And do you want to touch on that a bit?
Yes, exactly. That is really interesting, because what happened also kind of like autonomously is that they kind of like, this group of the communities, which is an association between, the NGO Banco do Preventório, which is a community bank, something which is it's not a normal bank at all. It's more of an association that also does microcredit and does kind of like financial support to community members. And they are together with the local university, UFRJ, which is the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And they actually were asked by other members of other favelas in Rio, in the other side of the bay, to kind of like to learn how to map, because the other communities were very interested. So what happened is that this community, this association between local university, very engaged students who work directly in the communities, and community members are now developing teaching materials, and are teaching kind of like 6 other favelas in Rio, and kind of like how to map with OpenStreetMap. And they took kind of like autonomously learn OSN materials and adapted to favela mapping, and then they created their own method of mapping that is based on some principles that they developed for mapping. Principles are ownership. The principles are really taking, there's lots of interesting principles. You should hear directly from them, but they developed their own principles and appropriated the tools to kind of like to map favelas, and are now teaching the other communities around that, communities which are around another initiative, which was more wiki-based, was the Dictionary of Favelas, and they already had this initiative, and they realized that they didn't have the spatial component of maps, and that OSM was great for that. So they were really very interested. So there was like this really cross-learning. They are multiplying and doing very autonomously these other projects associated.
Sorry, lost my mouse for a minute there. Cool. So we're going to go to questions in 5 minutes. So I'm going to ask you to keep the next couple of answers short.
Yeah.
The first thing is, I know that the community in Preventorio center the principle of always taking care of people. And I know this kind of sounds obvious, but I wondered if you could talk about like why that's important for this community and what it meant in practice, briefly.
Yeah, thanks for that, Pete. Indeed, this principle of
Okay, I'm just going to check. Is it just me who's lost João? Okay. All right, we've lost João. Let's see if he can make it back. Reminder that if assuming he does make it back, you can put questions in the chat for João. We'll have at least 20 minutes for questions, assuming he does make it.
I can maybe, this is Philip speaking.
Hi, Philip.
Maybe I just jump in quickly because I work with João and I've also worked on this project. Maybe I can maybe share some also experience from the Colombian side. So we also have done a similar. We also did mapping with a informal community in Colombia, in Medellin, and so they are also located on a quite steep hill. It's a much smaller community. It's about 800 people, and they are quite affected by landslides.
take was in a way.
João, are you back?
Yes. Sorry,
Okay.
my connection dropped a bit.
I was
Philip,
just quickly.
Philip, maybe just finish your quick description. That'd be nice.
So I'm just talking about El Pacifico in Medellin and how also they use the map that we created with them together in response to a landslide that they had in 2020, and that helped them to also put their point of view about relocations and about vulnerability to the municipality. And it so for example, it also showed how the boundaries might differ from the official point of view and from the community's point of view, and also to talk to the municipality about what they think is who is at risk and how they're actually dealing with the risk, because they are quite experienced. They have had some community risk schools, or they work with a local university to deal with the landslide risk, and this map also helped them to draw and to talk to the municipality about the dwellings that they thought were at risk and that might relocating, and to have some kind of a dialogue with the municipality about and negotiate who might need to relocate, what could be mitigated, and so they were a bit more in equal terms. So I'm going to put a link to a blog with an interview with the community leader who describes it quite well of how they use the map.
Yeah, please do. In fact, an open invite to both of you, or in fact anyone here who has like an interesting a link to something interesting or relevant that this group of people might enjoy, please feel free to stick them in the chat. We'll put them in the notes. We can include them in the community shoutouts. So share away with your stuff. Thanks, Philip. I appreciate that. João, you were just about to talk about the taking care of people, and then you disappeared. So if you can keep it short, because we obviously lost a few minutes there.
Sorry. Yes. Like taking care was really very important for this community also, because it was rooted in their history and of really kind of like the social bounds of constructing the community together was really important. And I think it shows again this importance of connecting mapping to rooted local values. And I think one of them was we take care of each other, and mapping for us has to be done in a way to take care.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to ask a question as part of the Q&A, but I'm going to ask it now, but you can answer it last. So my question, I guess, Philip, for you to think about as well, this community working group, like its mandate is to support different communities to grow in strength, in number, in, you know, achieving what they want to achieve with OpenStreetMap, you know, in terms of like humanitarian or social change or development objectives. So my question for you to think about and answer later is, what can we do to support your work, this community's work? Like, is there anything that we should be thinking about doing to actually be practically useful, or connect them to people, or connect them to things, or, you know, whatever it might be? But for now, I'm gonna open the mic. So if people can use the hand up function on Jitsi, or write, I don't know, hand in the chat, if you would like to turn on your mic and ask a question. So feel free to do that now. No need to be shy. If you prefer to ask your question in text in the chat, that's absolutely fine. Cool. So I'm going to go to Ruben. Do you want to turn on your mic and ask your question directly, and then we'll go to Ruben?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So I have two questions. I think one is more related about the initial phase of this mapping. What were kind of like the initial challenges for this community to start actually mapping? And then the second one is more about the sustainability of the map areas, like any tips and tricks on how this community keeps maintaining this and plans to maintain this in the long term.
Yeah, great talking to you again, Tassav, and you know, always appreciated a lot your work, and I think yeah. So thanks for the question. So initial challenges. So let's. Oh, it was Ruben. Sorry. Thanks, Ruben. So I thought it was Tassav. I was misread this. So Ruben, I think, you know, two things. Initial challenges we had. You know, one of big initial challenge was about language, really. You know, was about really understanding each other. Even if I speak Portuguese and I'm Brazilian, you know, it's not about always only about the same language in terms of you know, even in Portuguese we have different understandings, and I think, you know, about bridging these understandings was the first thing. About really, you know, we came with a research project, and that's, you know, a bit of the background for my answer to your question, Pete, about, you know, how research and communities and community working group for OSM can work together. So we came kind of like, you know, from a research project perspective, coming from outside with kind of like with some interest in terms of research. And, you know, the community had their own kind of like priorities and interests. How do we kind of like, you know, come together and understand, you know, design together a project that can be mutually beneficial? You know, I think that is definitely possible, but it is an initial challenge to really bridge this world. Sustainability of the map, Ruben, I think sustainability is a key point. I think, you know, one of the things we published a recent paper with Benny Havard in Heidelberg, and looked at, you know, different communities, you know, in a kind of more global study. And indeed, it is a challenge, isn't it? From a lot of countries, it is a challenge to keep the community alive and mapping. And I think that is something we were really very keen to do differently. You know, I had, you know, it's something I learned with in the past as well. I did projects in which it was more like we come, we map, and then we go, and then the map kind of like doesn't get updated, you know. And in this project, we wanted to do differently, because I realized if we come from outside and map, this will always happen, you know. So actually, we were trying to do differently. We were trying to do kind of like a different role for us. We don't come to map, or we don't come to map in terms of project, also not kind of like as a campaign, even that involves local people, but we come to build capacity. You know, we come to really strengthen capacity to map. That is actually our goal, not to map, but is to strengthen capacity to map. And this shift is hoped that then this capacity is there and keeps doing. And I think in a way we have some initial, it's early to say if it will be completely sustainable, but we have some initial hope with this kind of like multiplication of actually, this capacity that is multiplying to other territories, to other areas of the and other favelas. So I think that is, our strategy for sustainability is not come to come and focus on really what are the capacity and how really can we embed and anchor this in community values.
Great, thanks, Joe. Ribin, not Rubin, please feel free to unmute yourself and feel free to switch your video on if you'd like to as well. It's nice to see people.
Yeah. Okay, that was very much confusing, Ruben and Rubin, I guess. But it's nice to see you again, Joe, and also Philip. Actually, my question is more about asking suggestions from your side. We have been working on a project recently where we were trying to identify the second order impact of COVID-19 in the informal sectors of workers out there and the low income communities out there. So it consists of the slums and also the low income community areas where people are residing in. What we have seen over here, it's during the lockdowns and just immediate after the lockdowns were lifted, because of the socio-economic disruption, actually, what happened out there, a lot of people are sort of internally migrating back towards where they came from. Because, when you were here, most of the people in Dhaka, in terms of the low-income communities, they are migrated from the areas where climate change impacts are there. So already vulnerable areas are there. They came from there, and then they're going back to those places. So that might have been creating more added vulnerabilities in the process. So we were trying to find out what are the root causes out there and how much migration is happening and how frequently. So in the process, we tried to also integrate the OSM itself. We tried to map up update the base map over there and try to find out what are the changes happening. But my question is how we can integrate OSM more with this sort of projects if we want to scale it up and try to find out more. We were thinking that we can also move forward with try to find out, go back to those climate vulnerable areas where those people are remigrated to and find out whether there is capacity out there to support them. Otherwise, there would be much more vulnerability that will be added to their livelihoods out there. So this is more like your suggestion how we can integrate OSM in this sort of cases.
Yeah, thanks, Tassauf. Always great to hear from you. Yeah, and so much great work you've been doing in Dhaka, isn't it? I think were really picturing a great challenge, which is, one challenge for the map is the dynamics, and then we already started with the sustainability, and now you are talking about the crisis and how kind of like a crisis changes the landscape. And and actually some of the informal settlements change, because people move back. And again, how do you how OSM can support this? That is a great question. So I don't know if I have kind of like the answer to it, but I think I've seen good examples of OSM supporting the COVID-19 in different ways. Some of them people initially kind of like thought of, for example, looking at access to healthcare, or like looking at distances and things like that, and then the map kind of like helping this. So people have looked at whether kind of like you could look at a potential for access to sanitation and to cleaning, which could kind of like indicate a further vulnerability. But to be honest, I think, and I think similar to what you're describing, my work directly talking to the communities, one of the biggest impacts of the pandemic was more than the health, was the socio-economic for the informal settlements, really. People just got rid of their livelihoods, very quickly because of the lockdowns, because of the restrictions, because of kind of like, the lack of opportunity to exchange and to kind of like earn their living in the way that it happened before the pandemic. So in that sense, a lot of the OSM map, in our case, in response to the pandemic, was to support economic activity, was to support kind of like really community organization, both for doing kind of like emergency loans. For example, we have this microcredit project. So one of the things the community was really interested was to develop this. The other one which is very specific for Brazilian, is this social currencies that the community developed so that they can exchange money locally. And this money only kind of like really, it's a currency really. Now it's digital, but and they exchange it locally, so that if you earn in that currency, you have to spend it in the community. So then the money circulates in the community, So that was another thing we supported with the mapping, because they wanted to map kind of like the local shops who were accepting this currency and so on. So this was a way, I think, of trying to support this. I haven't quite worked with this. The name of the social currency project is actually Preventorio Bank, Community Bank is one of them. I will think, Philip, if you can find the links, most of them, maybe Ruben, you can read them because they are in Portuguese, but most of them will be in Portuguese. And they kind of like, there was a big movement in Brazil about the social currencies, community social currencies, really. And Preventorio is part of this network of community banks, which does this type of currency. And I think, the map was centrally, in this case, to try and support the community to really survive and to together to bond it through care to each other. Again, it's taking care for each other, care for people who can't afford, doing kind of like, for example, distribution of food parcels, and so on, for people who are in extreme vulnerable situations. I think I didn't encounter this migration situation that you're describing from Bangladesh, which I can clearly understand, the back migration because of the crisis. That's something really interesting to solve. I didn't encounter this directly, but how can we support them in this COVID crisis? I think it will be a matter of perhaps understanding, what could be most impactful, if it is about trying to, to stay in the communities and then kind of create these mechanisms to cope with the crisis, or if it is about kind of like, creating links between the communities. Yeah, so it's an interesting question. Sorry if I didn't kind of like quite answer it, but I hope at least some of those examples were useful.
Yeah, actually, it's a bit vast area to talk about. Rather, though you have connected the dots perfectly for us, it's good to hear some ideas from your side too. Just one added thing.
Ribin, I'm gonna interrupt you because we've only got 5 minutes, and you've asked a question, and I know you can talk for a long time. Very interestingly.
That's right.
So
I will get back to the one. That will be better. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we've got time for 2 more. So I want to open the invite again to anyone who wants to ask a question. I know particularly there's people in this room who are working on community mapping projects in slums and informal settlements. But I'm gonna, in the meantime, looking for that one more. There's a question from Gustavo, who I think is from Brazil, in the comments. Gustavo, would you like to turn on your microphone and ask it, or are you happy for me to just read it out?
So,
assume then that I'll read it out. So, Gustavo, yeah, go for it.
I can ask in Portuguese?
Please do. The comment for everybody else is in the chat, so have a look.
I have a question. Eu tenho uma pergunta sobre a situação atual do Brasil, assim, como eu moro no Nordeste, aqui tem uma parte que está sendo prevista para virar deserto, que é a Caatinga. Assim como o OpenStreetMap poderia, como nós da comunidade local do OpenStreetMap, poderíamos ajudar a prevenir e ajudar a comunidade local.
Ótimo. De onde você é, Gustavo?
Do Maranhão.
Maranhão. Great. Yeah, so thanks. So Gustavo is asking about this question about the Caatinga, which is a region, which is a very dry, savanna-like region, and actually, it's becoming desertified now with this progression. So thanks, Gustavo, for the question. Obrigado. And I think, how can OSM help with droughts? That's quite interesting. I've been thinking about that. My main projects today are related to floods and landslides, and they are kind of like more rapid, what we call rapid onset disasters, events, and droughts are a bit different. They're more slow burn, like the droughts and some of the other disasters. So the mapping for them is different as well. I think in floods we map a lot of vulnerable areas. For example, we map vulnerability. OpenStreetMap is great for that, for complementing data on hazard areas for vulnerability. With droughts, it's also possible to do a little bit of that, which is to look at areas which are more likely to get drier, and then think about vulnerability. People who are living in those areas, both in terms of how many exposure, and also kind of like looking at resources they have, and how kind of like and how many of them will be affected. This is one of the areas to start to get prepared for droughts, like really thinking about scenarios, and then vulnerability mapping. I think this is one of the ones I've been thinking about, really. But again, I think it would be great to think of it, Gustavo, in a way that think about people who are living in vulnerable areas to droughts, and then really with these projections, and then really thinking about what the implications this could have, and how the map could help them to really kind of like cope with those, which could be really, again, more socioeconomic. Maybe there will be implications about them losing the socioeconomic means and livelihoods also. If we were talking about rural areas and based on agriculture, this could have a big impact. So then we'll go to other types of mapping to support this type of mitigation action as well.
Thank you, João. Okay, we're supposed to get to the community working group agenda. It's probably only going to need 5 minutes. So Daniel, I'm going to ask you to have the last word. Only you've asked a message in the chat. There is actually a community working group forum. I'm going to move your message to there, and maybe João, if you don't mind, like following up afterwards, that would be great. So Daniel, please be succinct, but you have the last question.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Daniel. Sorry, I'm from Namibia. So I just wanted to find out, in terms of like the capacity building in the communities, well, after the initial mapping has been done, what other projects are being run to ensure that those maps are updated as these informal settlements keep growing?
Yeah, thanks for this, Daniel. I think, it is really important, I think, to go beyond kind of like this initial gesture that we have with the map, which is, okay, let's get the building footprints and the streets there, I think, that's possible, but then kind of like there is this danger of exhausting the like this. I think the way we've been thinking about it is really embedding very closely, understanding how the map can help people locally, really. What are the questions that we can support them. For example, in our case was about, they were interested in doing microcredit, and they were interested in doing food parcels, and that had nothing to do with map in the first instance. But then we kind of like bridged this with, okay, how do we actually understand where people are to distribute the food parcels? So, okay, so that is something the map can support. So then there was an interest to update the map. So that was the strategy. There was an interest to keep the map kind of like up to date, and then to further use it. And then they are, okay, now we did for that. We can also have a look at sanitation, because actually, there is this problem. Oh, but now that we did for that, we can have a look at waste. There is a big problem of waste. It's a common problem in informal settlements, that waste collection is also informal. There is no formalized waste collection service. So let's look at this and where people are putting waste at the moment, and how do we actually change this, to change pollution. So in a way, it is about moving with the questions of the community. One thing about coming back to Paulo Freire, it's a pedagogy of questions, really. Let's look at the map not as having the answers, but actually as supporting us to ask questions, together. And I think if we do this, we really move to kind of like to a thinking process that embed more the mapping and the sustainability. That has been our approach. So as I said, it's a bit early days. The project started 3 years ago, but that is our kind of like idea that this could help us give a base for sustainability.
João, I want to say a huge thank you. That was fascinating and lovely, and a great first AMA for us, I think. So, yeah, really a big thank you.
No, thank you, everyone. Great questions. Also great fun. Thanks, Pete. Yeah. One quick word about your question, your provocation, really. I do think that is something I would like to follow up, really, both like in the chat, like really the opportunities for all of us who are working with communities, local OSM communities, local communities, to really work together and then really do kind of like pair research and community work with local OSM community. I think we have a lot of synergies to explore there, and it is about generating data and using in the remote sensing things that, some of people here are interested in research, but it also is about kind of like understanding each other and finding ways to have dialogues like this one. So in that sense, many thanks, Pete. And I hope I start off a long process of conversation.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there's lots of applause happening in the chat. I hope you can see that. I'm going to post one more time a thread on the Community Working Group forum. So this is the thread about this AMA. So let's continue the conversation there. I'll repost my question. Oni can post his question. I assume it's he. Sorry, Oni. If it's not he, I apologize. And if anyone else wants to post a question there and participate in further discussion, I think that'd be great. We've only got 2 minutes left, so Ruben, you and I have both got agenda items for the actual meeting. Mine can wait, so I'm happy if you want to jump in for a quick update.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. So basically, it was a quick